It's Cain Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. We have wonderful guests today. This is a real departure. It's nothing psychic or mystical or tarot, although it probably will be by the time we're done. This is as I was telling them, my gateway drug into true crime. I have two podcasters here who do a really wonderful true crime podcast called The Murder Sheet. Cain and Kevin Greenlee. Welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
How about you just introduce yourselves, give us a little more background.
Totally. So my name's Anya. I'm a journalist. I used to be focused on the retail beat for a national outlet, but now I do full-time crime journalism on the crime beat with The Murder Sheet, and very fortunate to be working with my husband and journalism partner, Kevin here.
My name's Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney, although now I'm focused on doing this podcast with my wife, Anya.
So you guys do this as your main job now?
Yes. We are full-time true crime podcasters, which seems like a wild statement, but it's taken us a while, but we got in here.
Like I said, I discovered you just through podcasting, hearing, following true crime podcasts. But I've stumbled on you a couple of times on television. And I went, oh, I know that. That's pretty exciting, huh?
Yeah, we're really thrilled. We're very fortunate to have been kind of able to get to this point of sort of, building up a bit of an audience and, have people be interested in sort of like a journalistic take on true crime.
And the case we've worked the most on is the Burger Chef murders.
Right.
And so one thing people may have seen us on is the ID channel. Investigation Discovery did a documentary on that case, Murders of the Burger Joint.
We're the very awkward couple in a library.
Well, anybody in a library is my friend. So before we dig down deep into true crime, I wanted to ask you about the two of you together. I have this sense that there's a Lifetime movie about your meet cute. Tell us how that happened.
Yeah, it could be Lifetime, could be Hallmark Channel, I think, depending on how you want to spin it. I was doing a story on the Burger Chef murders. I was really keen to do a feature story, and my wonderful editors at the time were supportive of that, and they said, look into it. And I thought the Burger Chef would be an interesting case. It was unsolved. It was very upsetting, very sad case of 4 kids who were murdered for no reason, essentially. And it was a retail story because it was about this once great American chain that no longer exists, essentially. And so I started looking into it. And I was looking on like newspaper archives. I was looking on newspapers.com. And then I got this weird message from a strange man in my inbox who is Kevin.
Your first impulse was correct, right?
Obviously. Well, no, this tells you something about me, but when I read it, I was very like, oh, interesting. So I was pretty excited. And I think you probably remember what you wrote.
I've been researching the case for a while on newspapers.com. You can look up all sorts of old newspaper articles about almost anything. And I'd read pretty much all the old newspaper articles about the Burger Chef case. And one of the detectives who worked that case said it can be interesting sometimes. On newspapers.com, if you save an article, you electronically clip it, and it makes a note of all the people who have clipped individual articles.
Oh, because they're looking for the perpetrator, right?
Yeah. And so the detective said it can be interesting to see who is clipping some of these articles.
Yeah.
And so I noticed that someone with a username I didn't recognize was clipping a bunch of articles. And so I did a little bit of research and figured out that it was a reporter in New York. And so I decided I'm just going to write her and see what's going on.
Yeah. So we connected in the weirdest way possible over a murder. And then I think when I told my friends that, I'm like, they're going to think this is so weird, like that I'm, seeing this guy and this is how we met. But they were all like, that's very on brand for you, Anya. So.
Oh, I just think it's very romantic and it has just the right frisson, it's perfect. So am I wrong? I thought you were from Indiana originally.
So I was born in New York, raised in the suburbs of New York City. So
Oh,
I'm actually a transplant. I went to school in Virginia and then grew up in New York, and now I live here in Indiana. And I love
wow.
it. Yeah, people are like, "Oh, you're from the big city," I'm like, "I'm not from Manhattan. I'm from the suburbs." So
Yeah.
this is very much my speed. I really enjoy living in the Hoosier state now. Kevin is a Hoosier native.
Yeah, and she actually moved here because of us.
Yeah, so he
Oh.
got me in here.
That's so sweet. I knew that there's a potential for a screenplay in this somewhere. I just could feel it in my bones. So, how did you guys get into podcasting? Because podcasting is not necessarily the first thing I think of when I think of journalism, and there are quite a few lawyers who do podcasts. But
Yeah,
so, how
it's
did
a
you get
great
into that?
it's a great question, and I would say that like it's kind of a wild west. I would say it's as a
Yeah.
relatively new medium, like there's a low barrier to entry, which is great because it democratizes it, but anyone can do it. So I think sometimes there tends to be, okay, well, is this a reputable source or whatnot? And so I think what attracted us was just that it was a medium that we certainly listened to and were longtime listeners of a number of different true crime podcasts. But we thought that maybe we could add something by taking, Kevin's legal analysis and my journalistic chops and sort of putting them together in a way that we could research, do deep dives, and kind of put out work ourselves essentially. So the low barrier to entry definitely attracted us, and just the fact that so many people within that space are sort of looking for new shows, and like perhaps they might be interested in something that's a bit journalistic. And
Yeah,
so
a new perspective.
Mhm.
Yeah.
right, exactly. Something kind of taking it, we take it very seriously. We don't show a lot of personality on the show, and there's a reason for that. Just because I think it's great if people are using humor to deal with sad events, but we just felt like in our space we wanted to make it very serious, very deeply reported, essentially. And we've been fortunate that people do seem to be interested in that, and have kind of been listening to the show as a result.
Well, I personally really appreciate your really professional, really methodical, sort of a scientific approach to it, where you gather facts and you don't make great leaps, assumptions. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I love a podcast that goes into the psychology and sort of picks apart. It could be this, it could be that. Maybe he didn't like his mother. That's fun too. But I appreciate perspective on crimes I've heard about, but not in that kind of logical step by step approach. Because that's how you solve a crime. You don't
Yeah,
skip all the important facts. That's how crimes go cold, when people ignore really important facts. So before I ask my next question, you mentioned that there was a low bar to get entry into podcasting. It's a bar too high for me. I'm way down below that low bar. It's the technology I find really intimidating. Are you good with technology and it didn't bother you, or?
no,
Yeah.
that was high bar for us too. And we're like, we don't understand microphones. We don't
Oh,
understand
oh,
mixers.
oh, I could tell a story. Yes.
Yeah, we were pretty freaked out by all of that. We're
Yes.
still learning. We're students of that, all of the technological angles.
Well, you guys do a great job. Your most recent, I think your most recent episode, you were broadcasting live from library.
Yeah.
And I thought that was great because it takes a certain amount of resilience isn't the right word, but your adaptability to be able to do that. And I
We
find it
really freaked out.
intimidating.
Yeah.
We actually freaked out the library staff. At one point, a woman came in and was like, what are you doing in here? We had our whole setup. We had the mixer. She's like, are you guys DJs?
That's hilarious. Dance party at the library. That's hilarious. No,
Yeah.
I always respect people who feel, or at least pretend to be real cool with the tech because I cry every time I have to do something new. I burned out all of my daughters one by one trying to just set this YouTube channel up. So, it's the intimidation factor is pretty high. So what was the next question I wanted to ask you? We could go in a couple of different directions here. I'm curious. I know why I have a fascination with true crime. And I'm just wondering, did you encounter a case or a serial killer or somebody in your younger years that just sort of sucked you in and got you interested in the genre?
That's a great question. So I can speak from my perspective. I go back to maybe not a case, but maybe I am a practicing Catholic. I still am Catholic.
That's okay. We'll talk to you anyway.
Exactly. Get the hook.
I'm recovering.
You're recovering. I'm still trying my hand at it, but
see if you can perfect it, right?
Exactly. I'm definitely far from that. But I remember I grew up with all these like saints books, like books of the saints. And I think I was a pretty morbid child because I would like, it'd be like doctor of the church. And I'd be like, nah, like whatever. And then it'd be like martyr. And I'd be like, interesting. Like I was very drawn to those very morbid, horrible stories that you, I'm sure, suffered through as well.
The Maccabees, right? Love the story of the Maccabees because they got fried in a gigantic pan.
Yeah, you're like, what was going on? And I think that it intrigued me. And then as an older kid, I think I was very, very anxious, and I was very if like a murder documentary came on the TV, I'd be scared about it. But I think over time I started to be like, if I can learn more about it, I can control my fear. So I would read about the Manson murders or stuff that really scared me, the Zodiac killer. And I wasn't like developing a lot of knowledge, but it was a way for me to help control my anxieties about the world or getting murdered or things like that. So I don't know if it was a case. It was more of like a, frog boiling in water kind of like.
Well, the immersion theory of curing anxiety. No, it makes sense and completely. And Kevin, I imagine it was different for you as a man. The threats don't seem as imminent. When you're a woman, I don't think men totally understand. Women walk around, if they're smart, in a state of perpetual on guard.
Yes.
Yes. So for you, what was it?
It was actually something not terribly dissimilar. I've always felt, even as a kid, that having information about things was a way to protect yourself. And I remember when I was 8 or 9 years old, there was a crime here in Indiana where a young boy about my age was sleeping in a sleeping bag at the foot of his mother's bed. And someone came in and just zipped him all the way up in there and then beat him to death. And that stuck in my mind as just being a horrible, horrible fate. And I pictured myself as that child just being helpless to do anything. And so I decided I want to start reading about things like this to have a better idea of what's out there.
That makes sense. And I think that sense of being drawn to the morbid and feeling anxious, that's part of being Catholic. It really is. We used to have a thing every year where kind of like a weird retro beauty contest in a weird sense, where boys and girls, everybody came dressed as their favorite saint. And I always wanted to be somebody like Saint Lucy because she carried her eyeballs on a plate. I was into that. Love those stories. So I don't know. I'm surprised I don't belong to Opus Dei with the hair shirts and the self-flagellation.
It's never too late. No, I'm just kidding.
I used to joke which I want to be very careful what I say now because I got in trouble with YouTube for making a joke. Very ironically, it was apparently a joke. They took it literally, and I got in trouble for medical misinformation. So I'm going to be kind of careful here, but you'll get what I'm saying. Pre the unfortunate quiet of the past 2.5 roughly years before that, I used to joke all the time that I could probably quite easily be in a cloistered order if it weren't for all the praying. I couldn't handle that. But, you know, being withdrawn from the world and quiet, believe it or not, and contemplative, I could take that. Now I've had the misfortune to find out, you know, over the past 2.5 years, roughly. So anyway, it's neither here nor there. So that was your interest as a kid. You weren't fixated on things like Agatha Christie novels really appealed to me. I love the psychopathy in them. That's great. Plus,
I was a big Nancy Drew
I'm not
girl.
going to guess your age, but I'm of an age where it was the heyday of weird serial killers when I was the perfect age, when I was in my late teens. Ted Bundy, the Hillside Strangler, you know, the co-ed killer up in Santa Clara. I mean, just the endless number of lunatics that were out there. And I didn't have a car. I took a bus everywhere. And women were always getting abducted and disappearing from bus stops. And oh my God, you know, and that sort of fueled the fire of interest. So I saw you on a brief kind of a news interview with Fox 59. Does that ring a bell? Or is that a blur? And I have a very personal question to ask you. Are those all your books in the background?
Yes.
Excellent. You got some.
We have a bunch of books.
I
Yeah,
couldn't
they're all
figure
crime
out
books.
how to pause it and look really close. I couldn't read what was on the titles. I always judge people by the books on their shelves. So what are some of those old books you have back there? Are they just random, or is there like a theme?
In this room, they're all crime books.
Yeah, these are all crime books here.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah,
great.
This in our office, we're gonna do it up. Nice crime books. He's got books on everything: old Hollywood, American history, French authors. It's just
fabulous. So wonderful.
It's really. I mean, yeah.
Do you have that book? I'll be gone in the dark.
I'm pretty sure that's somewhere in here. Here's some
Murder
old
Without
ones.
Tears, Murder in Smutty Nose, all sorts of
Smutty Nose. I think you'd be interested in that one. That's a historical one. One of the first instances of not one of the first, but certainly an early instance of a true crime article and a fascinating case. It was these immigrants from somewhere in Scandinavia living alone on an island, and a man came and attacked them.
I know that story. Oh my God. Yes, I know that story. Young women and young men, and they were a couple were recently married of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I vaguely remember that.
Story.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, I totally judge people by their books, so you pass the test. So I have another question, and if it's too personal, we'll change the subject. But I was thinking about you guys. My kids are used to me being morbid. And I'm just wondering, has this affected your thoughts about having children? Especially, maybe you should talk first about, as much as you're comfortable, about the most recent controversial case that you've been delving into that is just, these people, oh my God, just awful.
Yeah, definitely. So the Delphi murders, the murders of Abby Williams and Liberty German up in Delphi, Indiana, has been something that's been kind of an all-consuming case for us recently. We've been fortunate enough to be able to report some, new things and scoops on it. And we've
kidding.
Yeah. It's a lot. And it's one of those cases. So it's so heartbreaking. Those girls were so beloved by their families and by the communities, and there's such heartbreak around it. And it's just, it's definitely had an impact on both of us emotionally, just given the tragic loss, but also I'd say the realization that I think we're pretty jaded. I think we were jaded coming into it, but I think we've become even more jaded reporting on it, because I don't know if I really recognized how many sexual predators are out there that want to target children that you don't ever hear about, but they're in every community. No one is exempt from this. And that realization has been not a great realization to have, but I guess an important one.
Well, for anybody who listens to my channel, I would venture the guess most of them are not huge true crime followers. They tend more towards the metaphysical or the political. But sorry, guys, it's Halloween. This is very briefly a case of two best friends who had a day off of school, went on a short hike across a deserted railroad bridge, and disappeared, were found dead the next day. And there's ample suspicion to think that they were lured by internet predator, right?
Yes,
I mean,
that's
you guys don't specifically point fingers or say, but boy, it doesn't take much to connect the dots.
It doesn't. And I'd say with us, it's like we are very, it's been a case that's attracted so much attention. It's been a case that's attracted a lot of different theories. And what we care most about is just, what are the police doing? What are they looking at? Like, we're just two bozos, we're not, we would like to, we will try to report it as accurately as possible, but we're not theorists or saying, oh, here's what we think, our grand theory. We're very much, here's where the police investigation is pointing to. And right now the focus seems to be on this internet predator theory of the case, that is where the police are digging into. So that's where we tend to go. And we can understand why they're digging into that, because the predator was in contact with one of the girls on the day of the murders. So that's
2 plus 2. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that confronting this sort of evil makes you a little hard-boiled sometimes. Things don't bother me much at all. But this case particularly hit a note, and I think it's because they were like lambs to the slaughter. You can see, we've got the visuals, because there's that brief video. You can see them being drawn like lambs to the slaughter. It's just true innocence being preyed upon. And I just wonder, do you feel like you've turned over the rocks and you're horrified by what you see underneath? Do you know what I mean metaphorically?
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, we just not in terms of anything bad necessarily happening to us, but just in terms of diving into the case in the amount of depth that we have. I mean, we've had some bad weeks, I would say, in terms of like mental health. Because just the idea of something so awful happening to these girls, and also just the nature of what you find out about people who prey upon the innocent and children, and that they're out there and that they are very sophisticated, and it's a scary thought. And unfortunately, we talked to a lot of experts about this, and they note that in the past it might have happened on sketchy chat room type things in the early part of the internet, but today everyone has a phone, and everybody's kid has a phone. So that's the access that these creeps unfortunately have. And it's made us very cognizant, and also wanting to use our platform, not just to do the journalism on the case, but to kind of inform parents, kids, and guardians. Here's what the threats are. And here's how you can maybe, you can't entirely mitigate any threat, but here's how we can raise awareness in a way that maybe helps parents and kids have those lines of dialogue.
Yeah, we got emails and stuff from parents who say, how do we talk to our kids about this? How do we deal with these dangers? And so we've tried to do episodes where we talk with experts who can answer those questions and give people really practical advice on how to keep their kids safe.
Yeah, I really appreciated the episode you did where that's exactly what you talked about, was warnings to parents and practical solutions for parents. I feel very fortunate my children are adults, and it's now their problem. They have to worry about it. I had enough to worry about. Now they can worry about it. But it's terrifying. And I think for me, it evokes a lot of questions about the nature of how you raise your children, mental health, trauma. Is it nature versus nurture, the nature of true evil? Is there evil, or is this people who just carry a karmic, I don't want to, but carry a karmic burden? It's like the burden of sin, right? And the horrible effects that has on your soul, the loss of the callousness, the loss of compassion, the sense of entitlement without understanding what you're doing to the feelings and psychology of other people. How has it altered or has it altered your view of humanity in general and of parenthood?
Yeah, for me going into it, I never would have really given much thought to severely restricting, we don't have children, we have not had kids yet, but would not have given much thought to internet hygiene and security. Certainly things like don't bully people online, the basics. But I think this has made me think about it in a way that goes a little bit beyond that of what needs to be done, and what are boundaries that you can set early, and also educate your child, even if they don't have the misfortune to run into an internet predator who's like an adult pretending to be a child, they could still run into peers who do bad things to them, or exchange messages, right, with a peer, and that can still have a really bad impact. So maybe having honest and open conversations, maybe some restrictions on, and maybe I think as a society, social media is so great for connecting with people and things like that. There's a real plus side to it, but I think we also have to really recognize the downside and what can be done about it. And it isn't necessary to be so plugged in all the time. I think that's some questions that I've had.
And to be gullible, that would be my big fear. I mean, look at the picture that was sent, the misrepresentation of the picture and the reality of who this character really is. These girls, we're going to assume, this is a big assumption, but these girls thought they were on their way to meet somebody very close to their age, well off. Didn't he brag about having fancy cars and Mr. Buff? Apparently the number of muscles between here and here is now more important than the number of muscles between here and here. This is what it seems to attract people these days. And I think that's a sad statement on society, but it's a whole different podcast. They just thought they were doing something else, thought they were possibly meeting somebody else, allegedly, and it's easy to fool people. I could be fooled that way easily. So I can imagine a 13, 14-year-old.
Yeah, their brain's not done forming yet. They still have a lot of, they're kind of becoming an adult, but they don't have an adult brain to basically make decisions and say, hey, maybe we should be a little cautious. Yeah. Kids think they're invincible. They're just completely, right. And we all remember being that age and probably doing really stuff that we would question now. But back then, it just seemed like nothing bad's going to happen. What's the worst that can happen? And unfortunately, most of the time, nothing bad happens. But once in a while, something very bad can happen. And this was one. It's not common for a internet predator to, be involved or for an internet predator to be linked to a murder. But they can still do untold, psychological damage on people by, extortion, things like that. And so that's, it's certainly an aberration, but these two girls, it's heartbreaking because somebody tricked them essentially. Somebody tricked two children, and it was a person who was obviously very good at manipulation and saying the right things to put them at ease and make them think they were speaking to a peer.
So you don't believe, as I don't believe, allegedly, that it was a crime of opportunity?
I'm not sure. I think there was, I don't know if we necessarily have enough information to form a hard opinion on that, because there's probably scenarios you could sketch out that's sort of like a combination.
Like a spider lying in wait, right?
Yeah.
Right.
We really just try to focus on what the police are looking at. And right now, the police investigation doesn't seem to be, they don't seem to think it was a crime of opportunity.
Well, it used to be Lonely Hearts. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but from the back of the newspaper, you could contact people. And then we kind of graduated to, do you remember the Craigslist killer?
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a ratcheting up of media to attain victims. And do you remember the cop who went online and interacted with people who wanted to cannibalize women? Remember that guy?
Yeah, the cannibal cop, yeah. That was all over the New York tabloids.
There's just a whole toxic stew of pathology out there that's shocking when it's revealed to the light of day,
Whenever you have a new technology, you have to assume that killers are going to exploit it in some way if they can. Yeah. If there's a new technology or new thing in society that might turn into something that somebody could use to meet victims, or it's unfortunate, but it just, every time we advance in human history with any technology, there's going to be a downside, essentially.
We're very clever primates, aren't we? So you mentioned that you're waiting to see, making your judgments based on what the police do, and without delving into anything delicate, because I know you don't want to do that. In general, has this changed your opinion of police departments? How's your relationship with police? I mean, because you're a lawyer, so you probably,
Well, to begin with, to give some context, before we got involved in doing the Delphi case, and that's a case that's primarily being investigated by the Indiana State Police. We spent a lot of time on the Burger Chef case, which is another case that was being investigated by the Indiana State Police. And I won't go into a lot of details, but to be blunt, our experiences on the Burger Chef case left us with a very low opinion of how the Indiana State Police were handling that case.
Really?
To the point that I personally had a lot of anger about it, because I'm close to some of the family and people who were affected by it. And so, we've talked about this on the podcast. There's some very bad stuff going on behind the scenes. So I think that our experiences on the Delphi case has really underscored the Indiana State Police is a really large organization. And that means that they may be doing a very bad job in one particular area, which is the Burger Chef case, but maybe doing a fine job in other areas. So I think on the whole, my experience researching the Delphi case has actually raised my opinion of the Indiana State Police.
And I'll add to that, in terms of, that's the Indiana State Police is obviously, the lead on both of those cases. But in terms of like policing in general, and I would second Kevin's opinion. I think the people working on the Delphi murders are very, very dedicated and working very hard. And I think that's commendable. But we're always critical. We try to be critical but fair with law enforcement. We try not to just take anything for granted and, oh yes, just because the police said it, that means, we're not their stenographers, but we're also not trying to throw rocks that, are unfair essentially. So we just try to be skeptical but fair. I would say police in general, so many people in the Delphi case have often really clung to every last word that the police release about it. And I think that's understandable. There was for years, a media vacuum, right? Where people weren't getting any new information. So they were really analyzing everything that was out there. And I don't know how helpful that always is. Not every, like, people kind of have like almost a Hollywood vision of like everyone's working with like a profiler and this word choice is going to do this. And I just think sometimes, people say things and maybe their language is a little bit inexact or a little bit confusing, and that's the end of it. It makes me always think like our policy on everything is the boring answer is probably true. Is there a big conspiracy, or is it just a bunch of incompetent people?
Right. Well, the banality of evil, it just is probably, when it all comes out at the other end and the answers are all out in front of us all, we're all going to go, oh.
Yes.
Yeah. Terrible, terrible story. And who'd have thought that guy would have done it?
And we're very imaginative people. Like we both definitely have the tendency to be like, well, what if this was connected? And like, get the murder board together. And we have to fight that as journalists because, if you can't prove it, if you're not getting it verified, if you're not getting it corroborated, that stuff you can't publish it. That's useless to you. And so I think, that kind of boring rule, but I think the boring rule also applies to what police say. Like people kind of like, it's so black and white, the thinking sometimes, because it's either the police are like playing 6D chess on the Starship Enterprise and are so advanced and ahead of everybody that it's all playing into their hands, or they're like, they don't know what they're doing and they're incompetent, but also maybe corrupt. And it's like, there's probably a middle ground where maybe some mistakes have been made, but people are trying. And I think it's a good lesson for anyone. Like once you really get involved and try and start talking to people in an investigation or who have experience, Usually you're going to find it's a bit more complicated than it appears on the surface, I would say. That's a long-winded answer for a relatively...
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think the human mind looks for patterns. I don't know if you watch Dateline, but like I'm an avid Dateline worshiper. And they did a thing recently about a young woman who was killed in Nome, Alaska. And I won't spoil it for anybody, but I will spoil a little tiny bit that's unimportant. The first suspect they had was perfect. The scratches at the scene matched his truck, which had scratches on it. He had a mismatched set of tires that identically matched the mismatched tire treads at the scene. When they found his clothes and shoes and a rifle in the truck, all covered in blood, he knew her. They'd had a falling out. I mean, it was perfect. He didn't do it. So it's just so easy to jump to conclusions. We're all human. You make mistakes, you know. So I guess I have a couple of kind of, I don't know, hard to put into words questions. See, I can't even describe them properly. I'm curious how, let me think about this a second. So now you've been exposed to these horrible sort of antisocial behaviors. I won't say psychopathic. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but antisocial behaviors. Do you carry like the fear of that with you? Has it affected your personal life in the way that you behave?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in general, it's made us be a little bit more mindful about our own mental health and sort of making sure that we're not getting burned out by working in a beat that is so horrible, tragic, nasty, disgusting half the time. We tried to kind of make sure we're making time. And this also comes from working with your spouse where, like you have to make sure that you have some sort of separation of church and state, of like, we're working, this is the work time, the work space.
Right.
And then we can go and be Aine and Kevin, just normal, carefree people. And that's been, that's not something that's necessarily has been easy to immediately come to. But I don't think we live in fear. People often are like, oh my God, you think, like if we cover a case, they're like, is the killer going to go after you? And it's like, I mean, we don't, we're not in a Lifetime movie. That tends to not happen.
Well, you're not 13-year-olds either. Right. You're not the right demographic.
Right. Or in any case, though. I mean, even in Burger Chef, people have been like, oh my gosh, you're going to get too close to the answer and someone's going to come after you. And we tend to be like, if you look at the numbers comfort us. We're not numbers people, but we like to catalog types of crimes. And when you look at like the number journalists who get murdered for looking into a story, it's fortunately rare. Unfortunately, there was a tragic situation in Las Vegas recently where a man
Yeah,
that's horrifying, and that really upset me because, like, I mean, that's just it's a really upsetting thing as a journalist to see that happen, and tragic for his family and the the media outlets there that he worked for. But it tends to be very rare, and so that kind of gives us some comfort. So I don't think we're like scared by any of this. We just want to like shine a light on it and do our jobs well, and make sure that we're doing a good job as journalists. What would you say?
Well, working with your spouse, just keep this in mind. The advice of somebody who's been married a really long time: it's a life sentence.
Kevin's gonna start running now. No.
I know. I bore people because I have these 3 jokes that I repeat over and over because I like them so much. And
I love it.
Life sentence and drives my kids crazy. My husband, of course, is long suffering. He just rolls his eyes and continues.
With us, I think one thing that works out for us is that we're both. How would you say it? Like we're very, very similar people. So like, which can be a problem because if like we both have similar weaknesses a lot of the time, like we can't do directions. Like if you put us out, like we joke, we got lost in an open field once.
Yes, that actually happened.
An open field. We couldn't find our way. Yeah. Do you know what actually saved us from dying of like starvation in the wilderness? Was our friend was laughing at us at the tree line, and we followed his laughter back to safety. It was a mess. So but the nice thing is that we're pretty similar and we're pretty good at reading each other. So if one of us is like stressed out or kind of having a hard time with dealing with work or something, I think we're able to kind of pull the emergency brake pretty quickly and kind of figure out a way of doing things in which it'll be a easier working environment and making sure that, things are going well in that sense. But
that whole direction thing cracks me up because I have no sense of direction, and I admit it. My husband, although he was an Eagle Scout, let me just put it this way. If I had $1 for every time we've sat in a vast and deserted industrial parking lot at the wrong end of a strange town throughout my married life, I would be at the French Riviera right now.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I can relate. That's one of those issues, right? So let's see. I asked you about this, and I asked you about this. Okay, this is a weird question, but we'll see where it goes. If you could pick any case, any famous case that was a cold case or just new and hasn't been solved, and know all the answers, what would it be? Which one?
Oh, that's a good one. I gotta say Burger Chef, because that's very important to us. And it's certainly old, and for a number of reasons, it doesn't seem to be a case that necessarily has DNA or kind of a magic.
The forensics are too dated. The methods of the forensic collections.
The crime scenes were destroyed. So I gotta say Burger Chef. My non-Burger Chef answer, I have to think about that. I'd be curious to know who Jack the Ripper was. That's probably a kind of a basic answer, but I'm gonna go with.
Oh my God, it's so funny you would say that, because last week, I told you that I do a book every weekend. Last week, I did a book by a woman called Dolores Cannon, who is a hypnotherapist who, in the process of helping people stop smoking and losing weight, she discovered that people actually, this is the claim, went back into previous lives.
She met Jack the Ripper?
No, but that's what's so frustrating. She actually had her subject had a conversation about that kind of thing, and not once did she say, wait a minute, who was he?
Tell me.
Yes. Oh my God, I'd love to know that. Yeah, I'd like to know the opposite. We know who the criminal is. We don't know all the crimes he committed. I'd like to know the entire criminal history of Israel Keys.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that'd be an
interesting one.
Wouldn't that be interesting? They think he's responsible for tens and tens more people than he's, been accused of, or it's been proven. Yeah, I would love to know. I'll tell you more about that off air. It's interesting. So I guess we need to talk about the Burger King murders. My memory of the facts is shaky because I've listened to all of your podcasts about it, but you've also done some other fast food restaurant type murders, and they've all they're a vast stew.
Yes, there's a lot.
Take the metaphor into the food area. And so I can't remember one from the other. The only one that I really remember vividly is the 4 girls who were murdered in the ice cream shop.
The
yogurt shop murders.
Yogurt shop, yeah.
That's a horrible one.
So, Kevin, what was your connection, if you don't mind saying, to the Burger King crime?
I got connected to the Burger Chef murders because actually I was around when they happened. I was like 7 or 8 years old, and they happened to occur on the very same evening that the Star Wars holiday special was on. And I watched that holiday special, and I was bitterly disappointed in it.
It's not good. It's not a good
And
show.
I spent a lot of time complaining about it. And then my mother sat me down and said, "There's some serious things going on in this world." And she told me
you think you've got problems? Listen to this.
Yeah. And so that always kind of haunted me, and I kind of kept an eye on the case. And many, many years later, I saw a television interview with the sister of one of the victims, and she discussed, the sorrow the family felt over not knowing any answers. That kind of touched my heart, and so I got very interested in the case. I ended up researching it pretty heavily, and I ended up meeting her, and she's now my client.
Oh, well, people need answers. There's nothing worse than not knowing. people would almost rather know that their loved one is dead and what happened than to have no answer at all. You always imagine the worst case scenario. It's a terrible situation.
Yes.
So I totally understand why the drive to solve these cases moves people for decades and decades. Terrible situation. I'm trying to think of any other crime that really jumps out at me as something that I would just die to know. Oh, here's one for you. The Missy Beavers case. Are you familiar with that?
That's one. Yeah, that's one that we've heard a lot. And it's sort of similar to Delphi in that they have the perpetrator on footage, but then they can't identify the person.
Yeah. Isn't that the strangest thing?
Yeah, that one's
do you know much about it?
I don't know much about it other than the very basics. She was teaching, I believe, yoga in a church basement, and they have all this footage of this masked and kind of like almost like body armor wearing figure wandering around. Yeah. It's a really eerie clip to watch when you know what they're about to do. And
yeah,
I know it's also attracted a lot of attention online and a lot of speculation and people kind of digging into it and sort of having different theories is my understanding.
Yeah. She actually, it's worse when you know what she really did. You're close. She wasn't a yoga teacher. She was some kind of real jockey sort of, not martial arts, but fitness teacher, like extreme fitness, the people that, really sweat and they're all buff and everything. And she was small, but she was apparently a powerhouse when it came to this particular series of exercise that's a program, and people were shocked on many levels, but also because she had the capacity to defend herself. So she had to have been taken completely by surprise. And then the question of motive, you can go in so many different directions. I think that when they finally figure this one out, that will be one where everyone will go, oh, that was what happened, because it's so weird, really, really weird.
Yeah, and you get yourself you get yourself into like, well, what would a killer do? But then it's like you're dealing with people who might just be acting really irrationally,
Yeah,
like,
you don't know. Yeah, you don't know. Was this person mentally ill? Was this person on something? Did this person have an obsession, either in general with the building or with her? Or was it personal? And if it was personal, was it this or was it that? I mean, it can go in so many different directions. You can tell I've read a lot of detective novels.
There you go. You got it.
So I know this is touchy, so I don't want to, open any wounds or anything, but I'll just say this and I'll let you take it from my statement. Being a fan of podcasts, as a listener, you hear things peripherally, and it seems like there's an awful lot of drama and melodrama amongst the community of podcasters, and I don't follow it because I've got enough drama in my own life, and I don't want it to spoil what's usually entertainment while I'm walking, so that I don't have to think about the fact that I'm sweating, so I don't want to get into it and know the real, infighting and disagreements and stuff. So one of the problems with that is it's so public. How do you handle that? I
think it's basically high school, right? Like in high school. Yes. So you get, these, this is one clique, this is another clique, there's drama, there's beef. We weren't really aware of that kind of going into it. So we sort of, I think, proceeded somewhat naively thinking like, here's all our peers and colleagues, let's all get along. And that did not happen. People really do not like being told that, they or people that they're in the same network with or people who they consider friends are not doing good work or are, criticism is often not received very well. I think we didn't realize the level of like unprofessional behavior that kind of tends to go on. Basically what our attitude is, we consider ourselves more peers with local journalists than other true crime podcasters. So those are the people we tend to be in communication with a lot more and, kind of mutually beneficial resources with where, we might cite their work, they might cite us. And that our kind of our methodology tends to more be in line with what a local, journalist does than what, your average true crime podcast does. And that's not to throw shade on true crime podcast. There's room for all types of different shows. There's not one size fits all. And, if you kind of want to listen to one that's maybe more casual and fun, and then listen to one that's more journalistic, then that's great. Then there's something for everyone, basically. But I think we deal with it by kind of just not paying any attention to it at all, and kind of just being like, oh, okay, so it's like that, and kind of being like, well, that's whatever, and then kind of
That's well said. That's really well said, because it does strike me, I don't know a lot about it, but it does strike me as sort of a high school environment. There's the cool kids and the mean kids and the popular kids and the fun, the theater arts kids, and it's all, and I didn't even go to a school like that, but it's such a stereotype. And
we're the kids who want to be in the library reading during lunch period, so we could be like learning more and trying to get, like, so we just keep our heads down, keep our nose in a book, and that's where we are.
I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. I just want to be around boys.
There you go.
I'm kidding. Believe me, I'm kidding. So I think that you guys really strike the professional note. You do that with grace. You stay out of it. You can absolutely tell that. And I do think that podcasting can be journalism, or it can be entertainment. And if it's entertainment, it can be serious entertainment, or it can be lighthearted. And there's room for everybody, as you said. And unfortunately, you get ego and you get money involved too, right? I mean, I'm assuming that people make money doing it.
Yeah.
Probably not nearly enough, but
it's one of those things. Like, I think the big money tends to be with the corporate owned podcasts, is big corporations that put
like
out
BBC
podcasts
and NPR and
right. People overestimate what it is to be a true crime podcaster in terms of an audience. But I think it's one of those things where we're independent. We're not owned by anyone but ourselves. So I think we're happy kind of being smaller, but able to control the editorial content.
You may have been owned and you just didn't realize.
Kevin sold the shares.
I don't know what people are saying. So let's see. I know what I was going to ask you, and I don't want to put you on the spot. I keep fearing I'm putting you on the spot here. But
yeah.
So what podcasts do you listen to?
That's a hard.
Yeah, okay, I know, because you don't want to step on toes, right?
No, it's not that.
The podcast I listen to the most is actually a comedy podcast. It's called Never Not Funny, hosted by the comedian Jimmy Pardo. And a few weeks ago, I took Anya to see Mr. Pardo perform live, and it was delightful. Really fun.
Hilarious.
And so it's just kind of funny when you work in an area. It's kind of fun on your free time to get out of that area and listen to other things, like a comedy podcast.
Since it's become a job, we don't listen to that much true crime, or even, unless it's for work.
Right.
And I would say for work, typically we tend to rely more on books or news articles than other podcasters, because oftentimes you have other people who are synthesizing that stuff.
And you want your research to be accurate. Right.
Exactly. And so I would say, and then for, one we listened to recently that was just a delight was when we were driving on a bit of a road trip. We listened to a few episodes of what was it? Cocaine and Rhinestones.
Yeah, that's a podcast about the history of country music.
And there was a really horrific,
weird.
Yeah. The podcaster covered a really horrific murder. It's not a true crime podcast, but it's like just a history podcast about that subject of country music. But I thought they did a really good job of being very sensitive and respectful while not turning away from the horror of the crime. So I thought that was I was like, wow, this person's not a true crime podcaster, but they sort of nailed it.
They could do it. Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's plenty of room for humor in it. And I don't think that that's necessarily disrespectful. Having worked in the medical field, there's a lot of dark humor. It's a coping mechanism, and it's very effective, but it can be misinterpreted. For example, you might have heard of this little podcast, My Favorite Murder, and they get a lot of flack, for being funny about horrible crimes. It's a really good coping skill. Let me recommend another podcast that Karen Kilgariff does that has nothing to do with crime. It's called Do You Need a Ride? And it started out, a friend of hers, who's also a comedian, Chris Fairbanks. They, pre our unfortunate 2.5-year period of seclusion before that, they live in LA. They literally picked up or took friends to LAX, which if you've ever been in Los Angeles, I went to college there. It's a nightmare. It's the quintessential nightmare, and the airport has only gotten worse. So they volunteer to take them back and forth from the airport, but the price of admission is you get recorded for the podcast. And
Oh my God.
Conversation. They always stopped and got a latte, and then, you know, they talk about things they're passing in LA. Sometimes they get into history of LA. Sometimes they just talk about the comedian business. You just never know what you're going to get, but quick, funny, and really decent.
You should check that out.
It sounds like a nice palate cleanser too. It's just kind of like fun and like light. I think there's definitely, I mean, we made a conscious decision when we were doing our podcast that we were not going to include much of our personalities or much humor in it because we just didn't think that we had a value add. We're not comedians, and we're certainly not like professional comedy writers or anything. So we were kind of like, any jokes we're going to be making are probably not going to be as good as people who do that and really know what they're doing. And we'll just end up embarrassing ourselves and bringing shame upon our families. So
well, you're the Jack Webb of podcasters, right?
Yes, exactly.
Oh my God.
We love Jack Webb.
I'm obsessed. Okay. We were watching Dragnet recently and we were I'm watching it. Jack Webb is this like amazingly awkward character in a way that feels really authentic to being awkward, not like Hollywood awkward of like, oh, I wear glasses, like, but like really conversation halting awkward. And I was like, that's how people see us. That's how we come.
No. I didn't mean that. Just without injecting your own take, without injecting your point of view. No, he's given that steel rod, works overtime for him, boy, I'll tell you what. It's a pretty funny situation.
It's really been a lot of fun talking to you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
You have to go.
We have to go here in a few minutes, unfortunately.
Okay, well that's fine because that was actually my last question was what you
Whoa!
like to do.
That was perfect time.
And I was thinking, God, I wish I had more. So I appreciate you guys being willing to do this. I know it's a bit unorthodox, but it's been really fun. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Well,
it's been a lot of fun.
You are a delightful interviewer and you ask great questions. So we are thrilled to do it. And also, like Irish solidarity. So we really appreciate.
I should throw that out there before we say goodbye. Is that Anya has one of my family's Gaelic names. I won't go into details, but because they don't want to be identified. But the name Anya, you never see it. No one knows how to spell it or pronounce it or what it means, and it's just
why your parents did it to you.
Exactly. Okay, don't go away. I'm gonna hit the goodbye button, and then I want to thank you properly. So thank you everybody very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. It's real departure from what we usually do. And slán go fóill and sláinte.